Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining our sustainability webinar. We've got an hour scheduled for today's session, so we'll get into it without too much of a delay. Just to confirm before we do, though, everyone's cameras and microphones are switched off, but there is a Q&A function and chat function available. So if you have any questions or need anything through the session, please use these. Most of you will already be familiar with EIC and what we do, so I won't give a big introduction about who we are, but we have lots more information on our website and videos on the YouTube channel, so you can see most of the previous webinars on there, as well as other content, so please check it out. In addition to getting information that you might want online, we're also just an email or a phone call away. So if you do want to discuss anything in particular, please get in touch. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So, why are we here? Well, the aim for today's session isn't to tell you everything that you're going to need to know about different legislative requirements and pressures that organizations face to be more sustainable, or the challenges you have to overcome to make it happen. But rather, we'll be looking to do three things. We'll be acknowledging those things. We'll be acknowledging the direction of travel and that the compliance requirements and the pressures to be more sustainable and the expectations are going to continue to rise. And then lastly, we'll explore how to create the best solution for you. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but there are fundamental principles that should be followed. In some of the promotion for this webinar, you may have seen greenwashing mentioned. Sorry, greenwishing mentioned. I hadn't heard of it before. I had heard of greenwashing, obviously. But it sums up a real issue really well in just two little words. Unlike greenwashing, which is where organizations are typically trying to make misleading or unsubstantiated claims about environmental or sustainability things, greenwashing is just where targets are set, but there isn't really a firm plan of how to get from A to B. So although there are generally good intentions, they lack an operational framework or a realistic pathway to make it happen. So they're probably not going to work. In greenwashing, unlike greenwashing, it isn't a direct problem so much as it's a symptom of not having a robust strategy and a plan. And it exists because of the pressures that organizations have. So it only makes sense that as those pressures grow, so too do the risks of greenwashing happening. And it also means that the consequences of doing it are only going to get bigger as well. So having disparate efforts to achieve different compliance requirements or having targets out there without a robust plan or a framework that manages and measures and overcomes the different challenges you'll face, between A and B, are only going to make, that kind of approach inefficient and ineffective. So what we're looking to do today is just talk about what organizations are facing and what the best way to handle it is. So I'm joined today by a couple of colleagues from our compliance team. So I'll hand right over now to Jodie to talk about some of the compliance requirements, and then Nazri will pick up at the end to talk about more aspirational sustainability targets and plans and what you should be doing. But please do feel free to ask any questions throughout, and although we'll keep it till the end more than likely, it's good to see what those questions are. Super. So I'll hand over to Jodie now.
Thanks, Billy. So hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. So my name's Jodie, and I am a sustainability consultant here at EIC, where I've been for 10 years. Over this time, I have seen a large shift from companies seeing sustainability as a tick box exercise to using it to showcase their commitment to their sustainability journey. First, I'll be talking through recent updates in compliance, voluntary schemes, and certifications. Then Nazia will talk to you about why this matters. Starting off, we have streamlined energy and carbon reporting. As we're now entering our 6th year of SECR, the scheme is well established with minimal changes seen so far. SECR was introduced in 2019 and it now applies to 11,000 UK companies, making it one of the UK's core mandatory carbon reporting frameworks. But how successful has the scheme actually been? The Department for Energy and Net Zero recently released a review of the impact that SECR has had. This actually showed that 79% of businesses disclosed information they otherwise would not have published. 61% reported greater boardroom interest. 55% saw strong internal collaboration, and 56% improved tracking and energy efficiency projects. The strongest quantitative finding, however, was that SECR has contributed to a reduction in energy use. Electricity and gas consumption have fallen by 4.5% in 2020 and then 6.2% in 2021. Scope 3 reporting is currently voluntary, but strongly recommended for organisations seeking an accurate picture of their carbon footprint. Since 2022, 31% more companies have reported Scope 3, with it accounting for around 85% of their total emissions. Including Scope 3 annually in SECR helps streamline more detailed data collection required for ESOS every 4 years, and it also supports with wider carbon reporting initiatives. This can often act as a stepping stone towards ISO accreditations carbon management planning. It stands for UK Sustainability of February 2026 and developed by the International Sustainability into two sections. They are UK SRS 1, which covers general sustainability disclosures, and UK SRS 2, which focuses specifically on climate-related risks and opportunities. Currently, the standards are voluntary and can be used by any organisation. However, they are expected to become mandatory over time, particularly for listed and large businesses. UK SRS is likely to build upon and potentially replace elements of existing frameworks such as SECR. While SECR mainly focuses on energy use and carbon emissions, UK SRS requires much broader disclosures, including governance, strategy, risk management, and future-facing climate risks, significantly expanding the scope and depth of reporting. We have actually recently released an article about this on our website, so head over there for more information. Moving on to ESOS, it's a mandatory energy assessment scheme for large UK organisations, covering around 40% of the UK energy consumption, which plays a key role in improving energy efficiencies across industry. The next milestone is Phase 4. Organisations are continuing to meet Phase 3 action plan and progress update requirements. Alternative routes to compliance, such as display energy certificates and green deal assessments, have been removed from the scheme. This means that most organisations will need to complete site-based energy audits. ISO 50001 does remain a route to compliance in ESOS Phase 4. We have analysed some information available on the EA notification of compliance, which showed that 5% of companies use ISO 50001 in Phase 1, compared to 10% in Phase 2 and 15% in Phase 3. And we are expecting this to rise again for Phase 4. The reason why ISO 50001 is becoming more popular in ESOS is it because it provides a structured system for continuous improvement. As ISOs follow a joined framework, many organisations add in other ISOs, such as ISO 14001, which is the environmental standard, or an ISO specifically linked to industry that they operate in. At EIC, we have in-house ISO 50001 implementers, ESOS lead assessors, and experienced site auditors, providing both strategic and practical expertise to support compliance. There were originally some plans for closer alignment with net zero targets to be included in ESOS, but this has now been delayed until Phase 5. Moving on to CBAM, this is a new scheme that started in full force January this year. It is the EU's carbon border levy designed to level the playing field between European producers and international imports. It works by ensuring that imported goods pay a carbon price equivalent to what the EU companies already pay under the EU emissions trading scheme. This helps prevent carbon leakage, which is where production moves abroad to avoid stricter climate rules. CBAM currently applies to 6 sectors. They are cement, iron and steel, aluminium, fertilisers, electricity, and hydrogen. From January this year, importers need to buy and surrender CBAM certificates based on the emissions embedded in their goods, with the first full compliance deadline September 2027. Right now, the EU is refining how carbon costs are paid outside the EU and can be deducted, including rules on carbon credits, pricing calculations, and independent verifications. Moving on to BICS. This is a new UK government initiative which was announced in 2025 and had its structure confirmed in 2026. The scheme is expected to launch in 2027 and should support over 10,000 businesses. The scheme aims at improving the competitiveness of manufacturing businesses by reducing electricity costs for energy-intense industries, where the high electricity costs are major challenges. To address this, BICS removes certain policy-related charges from its energy bills. The eligible businesses will be exempt from costs like renewable energy obligation, feed-in tariffs, and capacity market. At EIC, we are currently working behind the scenes to set up processes to support companies with this next year. This scheme may sound familiar to those who are already part of EEI or CCA. However, we are pleased to share that companies can be part of these schemes simultaneously. ISO 14068 is the international standard for carbon neutrality. In 2025, this fully replaced PAS 2060, marking a significant shift from a more flexible framework to a much more rigorous, globally aligned standard. Moving on to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So this was established in 1998 and is the world's most widely used standardized framework for measuring, managing, and reporting greenhouse gas emissions. At EIC, we are proud to say that we use GHG Protocol as standard in our services, including SECR and ESOS. GHG Protocol is currently undergoing its most significant structural revision since 2021. Key updates include a review of Scope 2 accounting, which may tighten how organisations use renewable energy claims and increase scrutiny on Scope 3 emissions, with higher expectations for data quality and supplier engagement. For schemes like SECR and ESOS, this could mean more robust evidence requirements, closer alignment with reporting standards, and less flexibility on methodologies. Moving on to ISO 14001, as previously mentioned, this is the Environmental Management Standard, and it was started in 1996. This standard has had many updates since then, with the latest being earlier this year. The changes are minimal, however, there's a stronger focus on current environmental issues like climate change, biodiversity, pollution, and resource use, along with clearer expectations to show measurable performance, not just processes. There's also more emphasis on leadership accountability, making sure that environmental management is built into wider business decision making. Organisations are now expected to assess climate risks and opportunities as part of that. Another change is around the supply chains, with more focus on managing environmental impacts beyond direct operations and improving oversight on suppliers. That's all from me. If you have any questions about anything I've mentioned so far, please feel free to ask in the webinar, or you can send us an email and we'll get back to you. Over to you now, Nazia.
Thank you, Jodie. And hello, everyone. I am Hasya, a sustainability and net zero consultant at EIC Partnership. In this section, I'll walk you through how organizations move from sustainability ambition to real accountability, covering changing expectations, the risk of ambitions without delivery, and how to build credible targets and pathways. The aim is simple: connecting ambition to practical delivery. Let's start with what we are observing across the sustainability landscape. So, before we move into targets and delivery, it is worth stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. Sustainability can feel increasingly fragmented. More frameworks, more regulations, more reporting requirements, and more terminologies. But underneath that complexity, the direction of travel is becoming more clearer. Whether we are talking about reporting standards, energy compliance, carbon neutrality guidance, scope 3 expectations, or anti greenwashing rules, they are increasingly asking for the same things: clear governance, reliable data, risk management, measurable targets, and evidence of progress. So while the requirements may look different on the surface, they are pushing toward the same outcome, which is better accountability and more defensible sustainability performance. Most frameworks are now asking four simple but important questions: who is accountable for all of this? How reliable is the data that is being disclosed? How are risks being managed at organization level? And what progress has actually been achieved with respect to the targets and the plans? So before we move on, I would like to bring this back to your own organization. And you would see a poll appear on your screen now. And I would like to ask, which of this is your organization's biggest sustainability challenge today? Is it the data quality, scope 3 emissions, target delivery, or ownership and governance? Please choose that feels most relevant right now. And it would be interesting to see, because we would have mix of everything, but we would like to see how your organization is being handled right now. And I'll pause for a minute. Oh, interesting. Most of the people have said scope 3 is the major challenge, which is understandable because scope 3 is often where the largest impact happens and where a lot of organizations have least direct control on. So the challenge become measurement, supply and engagement, and influence becomes very, very challenging. After after all these responses, I just do want to make a point that these challenges are connected. Data affects targets, governance affects delivery, scope 3 depends on supplier engagement, and all of this affects how credible an organization's sustainability position really is. That brings us to the real shift on the next slide, where we will see that the sustainability is no longer just about what organization disclose. It is about what they can demonstrate, and this is the shift that really matters. Sustainability is moving from disclosure to demonstrable actions. In practice, that means a move from reported data to traceable, auditable data, from targets to credible delivery pathways, and from ambition to evidence of progress, which changes the conversation. The question is no longer simply, what are you reporting? But it has now shifted to, what are you delivering? And can you evidence it? This matters because expectations have matured. Investors are looking for credibility. Customers want evidence behind the claims that organizations are making. Board want clarity on risk and performance, and regulators are focusing more closely on robustness and transparency. And that raises an important challenge. What happens when commitments have been made, but the system to deliver and evidence them are not yet strong enough. This is what I would like to describe as the risk of green wishing. It is not necessarily deliberate greenwashing. More often, it is a gap between genuine ambition and practical delivery. It happens when organizations set ambitious sustainability goals with the right intent but without a clear enough pathway to achieve them. And we see this gap reflected in the data as well. If you look at that, fewer than 5% of entities meet full net zero integrity criteria. Only 42% of companies report any scope 3 emissions, which relates to the previous question, like only few of them have started the journey on it. And many listed companies are still not aligned with the net zero pathway, with the continued reliance on future offsets or emerging technologies. And in practice, this creates a familiar pattern. Targets are often set, but delivery pathways are unclear. Scope 3 is acknowledged but not fully managed. And strategies exist but are not always embedded into operations, procurement, or even your investment decisions. So the risk is no longer just reputational, it has become regulatory, financial, and commercial. The challenge, therefore, is not about ambition, the challenge is execution. To make this more practical, I would like to get a quick sense of where everyone is on their scope 3 journey and the kind of external pressure you may be starting to see, which is where is your organization on its scope 3 journey? Some might have not started it, and some organization may have measuring it, but still improving on data quality. And they might be engaging suppliers and setting priorities, but not fully developed. And there would be some organization who are being asked by investors, customers, or tenders, but are still exploring to what to do. Please select what feels relevant today and what reflects what your organization is going through. And it would be good to see how organizations have been in this situation. Oh, that's interesting. Um, which it gives a good sense of how varied this journey can be across organization. Coming out as, most of organization are still measuring, but still improving on data quality. That probably reflects where many organizations are today. Measurement is a positive step, but broad estimates alone do not always give enough confidence for decisions. The next stage is to improve the quality of data, document assumptions clearly, and uh, identify which categories or the suppliers matters the most. This is where Scope 3 starts moving from a reporting exercise into something that can guide an action. The key takeaway here is that Scope 3 often exposes the broad challenge we have been discussing, but organizations are increasingly being asked to provide evidence, even while system and processes are still evolving. And that naturally leads us to our next section. If credibility now depends on evidence, what does a credible organization actually need to demonstrate? And if I have to summarize this in practice, the credibility now comes down to five things: defensibility, feasibility, accountability, delivery, and continuous improvement. In simple terms, organizations need to show that their commitments are realistic, owned, often measurable, and improving over the time. The organizations best prepared for scrutiny will not necessarily be those with the boldest commitments. They will be the ones that can prove their commitments are credible and deliverable. And that is why it is important to focus on the next section, that the challenge of getting targets right. In this section, we will explore why many organizations find it difficult to turn targets into action, what the common delivery gaps are, and what a credible pathway should include. Let's start looking at the reality behind these targets. Often, many organizations have already set sustainability targets. The challenge now is whether those targets are truly deliverable. In many cases, targets were set during a period of increasingly stakeholder pressure, sometimes before organization had fully understood the pathway or maybe the cost or operational changes required to achieve them. As delivery begins, several challenges become visible. The targets are not fully integrated into the financial and operational planning. Scope 3, often the largest category, remains the least controlled, and accountability is often spread across multiple teams without clear ownership. And that is where sustainability stops being a standalone initiative. It needs to become a business transformation program because delivering a target requires decisions across multiple departments: procurement, your operations team, finance, product design, energy use, your leadership team, governance, and even investments. So the real question is not simply do we have a target? Instead, it is do we have the data, ownership, funding, and the roadmap to deliver it? And when these foundations are missing, the same delivery gaps tend to appear. Moving on, let's look at the most common pitfalls that organizations face. When they struggle to deliver sustainability target, it is really because of the ambition like we have seen. It is usually comes down to recurring execution gaps. The first one being incomplete or uncertain baseline. If the baseline is weak, everything built on top of it becomes less reliable. May it be the target or the roadmap or the business case or the progress of reporting. Interestingly, S&P Global Sustainable found that only 32% of the companies reported comprehensive Scope 1 emission data, showing that even foundational data can still be a challenge. So situations are where companies are still struggling with the basic Scope 1 and Scope 2 data as well. The second is limited supplier engagement. This matters because Scope 3 often represent the largest share of the footprint. And if you see via the study conducted by CDP and BCG, they have found that the upstream supply chain emissions can be 26 times, which is a lot, higher than operational emissions. Yet only 15% of corporates had set a supply chain emission target. The third is lack of cost modeling and roadmap clarity. Targets may exist, but if they are not linked to investment decisions, operational planning, and a sequenced roadmap, the delivery becomes too difficult. And finally, the residual emissions and offsettings are often considered too late. A credible pathway needs to prioritize real reductions first, define what residual emission may remain, and only then consider the role of credible removals or offsets. So there are not just technical issues, there are issues related to strategy and planning. So even if targets exist, but the delivery system behind them is not strong, there's always going to be a challenge. And before we move on, it's worth reflecting which of these gaps would most affect your organization's ability to deliver its target. Is it the baseline, supplier engagement, cost modeling, roadmap clarity, or residual emission? Often, it's not just a single gap in isolation. One area can impact the entire delivery system. I'll leave the chat box open for a moment, so please feel free to share what resonates most with your organization. And as you're reflecting, or adding your thoughts, I would like to bring a key takeaway is that the pathway should be built around the real delivery gap, not just the target itself. So, if these are the common gaps, the next question is how do we build a pathway that addresses them in the right order? A credible pathway is essentially the response to those pitfalls. It starts by strengthening the evidence base, improving the baseline, identifying the biggest emissions hotspots, and understanding where the organization has the greatest ability to influence change. From there, the focus moves to prioritization. Which intervention will have the greatest impact? What will they cost? And how feasible are they operationally? And who needs to be involved to deliver them? Only after that, organization build the implementation roadmap with clear ownership, timelines, investments requirements, and a view on any residual emissions that may remain. The takeaway is a target should be the outcome of the plan, not the starting point. Strong targets are data led, cost informed, and operationally realistic. This is what gives leadership confidence that the target is not just aspirational but achievable. On the next slide, we'll compare what ambition led approaches look like against delivery led approaches, because that is often where the gap becomes visible. Here, you would see that the distinction is really evident. On one side, you have an approach that are mainly ambition led. The targets are announced, owned largely by sustainability, and used mainly for reporting. But on the other side, you see stronger approaches treat the targets as a business plan. That means that the targets are supported by data linked to cost and investment and owned across the functions that actually influence the delivery. In practical terms, the organization should be able to explain what needs to happen, who is responsible, what it will cost, and how progress will be tracked. That is what turns a commitment into an execution plan. And this is an increasingly what stakeholders are looking for. Not just whether a target exists, but whether it is embedded into the way the business operates. To bring this to life, let's look at a brief example where the ambition was already clear, but the delivery model needed to be strengthened. This is the classic case study, reflects an organization we worked with, a large customer facing with complex product portfolio and global supply chain. They had already made an ambitious public commitment, which includes scope 1, 2, and 3 targets, but the delivery model needed strengthening. There was limited visibility of scope 3 emissions, no clear prioritization of high impact categories, no structured roadmap, and limited alignment between targets and investment planning. So, our focus was to turn ambition into something practical, measurable, and defensible. We started by strengthening the scope 3 baseline, identifying the most material categories, improving data quality, and prioritizing the suppliers and the spend areas where action would have greatest impact. From there, we supported a practical decarbonization pathway, including targeted interventions across different teams like procurement, operations, design team, and we planned a phased roadmap that aligns to the business cycles and clear link to capex planning. Importantly, this was not just a sustainability exercise, it required collaboration across different departments and different teams to embed what was needed. The original headline target did not change significantly, which was the brownie point. But what did change was the confidence. confidence within the leadership to make investment decisions, confidence within the teams on what needed to be delivered, and confidence among external stakeholders that the plan was credible. So the key difference was not just to have a target, but having a plan that made that target achievable, measurable, and defensible. Well, so far we have looked at expectations and targets and delivery. Next, we look at the role compliance can play in supporting that journey. This is the point where compliance stops being just a requirement and starts becoming a part of how organizations manage performance. On the next slide, I want to focus on why compliance often fails to deliver value. Many organizations invest significant effort in compliance, collecting data, completing submissions, preparing reports, and responding to regulatory requirements and doing all the hard work. The issue is that this work is not unimportant, it is obviously essential. The issue is that often this remains disconnected from decision making. It sits in the report, spreadsheets, or annual submissions, but does not always influence operational planning or investment decisions, supplier engagement, or even performance management. So, compliance alone does not automatically create a value. Value comes from what organizations do with that insight. Moving on, I would like to put some light on how do we move compliance from reporting exercise into something that supports better decisions. The strongest organization treat compliance as a management tool and not just as an obligation. In simple terms, compliance should generate useful insight, help organization prioritize actions, and ultimately support better business outcomes. For example, energy monitoring, which forms a part of your SSCR, ESOS, and other compliance related activities, can help identify cost saving opportunities. Scope 3 analysis, which again need to be disclosed in CFT report, TCFT reports, and other such sustainability related disclosures, can highlight supplier risk and engagement priorities. ESOS can help organization prioritize energy efficiency investments, and ISO 50001 can support continuous improvement by embedding energy performance into management system. So the question has shifted from what do we need to report to what can this help us improve. That turns compliance from a reactive exercise into practical source of performance improvement. But this only works when different parts of the systems are connected, when the same data supports reporting, strategy, and delivery. Moving on, it is important to highlight that the real value comes when everything connects. Data collected from the reporting should help shape the strategy. That strategy should guide delivery, and delivery should create measurable value. When these elements are disconnected, compliance can feel very reactive, expensive, and often time consuming. But when they are integrated, sustainability data becomes a business advantage. It can support investment planning, supplier engagement, risk management, and operational improvement. That brings us back to the central message again. Credibility is not built through reporting alone. It is built through the reliable data, clear accountability, practical delivery, and evidence of progress. So, as we move into the final section, let's bring this back to the immediate actions organization can take now. Having looked at the expectations, targets, and all the delivery and compliance routes, let's now bring this together into key actions organizations should prioritize next. As we come toward the end, there are few key messages I would like to leave with you. Expectations are tightening. Scope 3 is coming under great scrutiny. Target needs to be costed. deliverable, and defensible. And the wider reporting and regulatory landscape is becoming more connected. So the direction of travel is clear now. We are moving from reporting to more verified reporting and to have a evidence of delivery. In simple terms, organizations are no longer being judged on what they disclose, they are increasingly being judged on what they can demonstrate. And that is where we ask again ourselves one more question. What should organization focus on now? So let's now look at some immediate priorities. And it would be 6 practical priorities, if I have to say. The organization should start with data quality because credible decisions depend on reliable information. Then look closely at scope 3 caps, especially where emissions sit outside the direct control. From there, stress your targets. Are they realistic? Are they costed well? Are they deliverable? Recognize ISO frameworks can also help provide structure, governance, and credibility. At the same time, organizations need to prepare for more regulated disclosure expectation, including UKSRS, CSRD, style requirement, and CFT style disclosures. And finally, consider where external expertise can help accelerate the journey. Because for many organizations, the challenge is not knowing that the action is needed. The challenge is having the time, the capability, and the structure to move from requirements into implementation. That is where the right support can make a real difference, helping connect governance, data, reporting, and delivery into one practical approach. Moving on to the next slide, I'll briefly explain how ERC partnership supports organization in doing exactly that. One thing that we have been speaking about today is that sustainability is moving from reporting into delivery. And for many organizations, this is not whether action is needed, because most of them already recognize that. The harder part is having the right data, time, and capability, like I said. This is where EIC partnership can support. We work across data, reporting and strategy, and implementation, which covers compliance, carbon, energy, and governance. Our role is to help organizations connect those areas so targets become delivery plans, reporting becomes a performance insight, and compliance becomes like a source of value. Ultimately, our focus is simple. Organizations need help, and we are helping them to make their commitments credible, costed, and deliverable. Moving on to the next slide, I'll break that support down into core areas where we typically help. And you would see that we also help with 4 connected areas. One of this is reporting and compliance support, such as SECR, ESOS, CBAM readiness, and wider disclosure alignment, helping organizations respond to regulatory requirements with confidence. We also support organizations with carbon and net zero strategy and implementation, providing end-to-end support across carbon footprinting, scope 1 and 2 and 3 assessments, target setting, and decarbonization roadmaps. Next, on the energy and the operation side, we support areas such as ISO 50001 procurement and efficiency programs, helping organizations improve energy performance, efficiency, and resilience. And from a governance and strategy perspective, we help with ESG reporting, evidence frameworks, and implementation planning, giving leadership teams the structure and the insight needed to make informed decisions. Across all of this, the focus remains the same, turning the compliance requirement and sustainability commitments into a practical action, which is measurable and which creates a business value. Along the side that we I've just spoken, we also help organization align with recognized standards and frameworks. This includes support with ISO standards, which is uh, ISO 14001, 50001, 14064, and 14068, which majorly covers environment management, energy management, carbon accounting, and climate credibility. We also support with science-based targets initiatives and also initiatives such as RE100, helping organization align targets and energy transition plans with the recognized frameworks. EIC supports in way that brings everything together as a part of an integrated approach to strengthen your governance, build credibility, and deliver real outcomes. So to close, I would like to come back to a central question that is behind this today's session. Can your organization prove what it has promised? And to reflect on that, let's consider one final thought. If your organization have been asked, or if your sustainability is challenged tomorrow by a regulator or an investor or customer, how confident would you be to evidence that? Could you could you demonstrate it? The reliability, the clear accountability, and I would leave everyone to answer that. Great. Looks, yeah, somewhat confident. Yeah, I think this is what uh, the current trend look like, because most of the organizations have worked on the baseline data. They have some kind of a structure, but are lost in how to structure that information into creating a value, driving business decisions, and making sure that this just not remains as a sustainability exercise, but becomes a culture within the company, drives their business value, and create much more holistic approaches in dealing with the stakeholders. So I would like to end this, and I would like to let you know that if you are asked tomorrow and by your regulator or investor or even customer, would you be able to demonstrate reliable data or a clear accountability, a more funded plan, or a measurable progress? Because increasingly, credibility will not come from the ambition of the commitment alone. It will come from the organization's ability to prove that commitment is credible and costed. And just to add, that is where EIC can support, bringing the right expertise, the experience, the practical delivery to support and help organization move through that journey with the confidence. Thank you very much. We would now be happy to take questions.
Lovely. Thank you, Nazia. Yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. And thank you for sticking with us so long in the heat, because it's baking. Okay. Just trying to load up the questions. Um, got one here. Maybe it's for you, Nazia. How do we know whether a sustainability target is credible?
So, if you have to understand if the targets are credible, you would have to make sure that the data behind is well structured, documented, and have everything it needed to support the evidence back. So in simple terms, it would be more like, you making sure that whatever data is being collected is through a system, is not too much dependent on manual systems, but is more dependent on how it's structured, how the culture is being developed, and how it is often being, considered. If everybody in the team and uh, in your organization are being sensitized on what they need to deliver, and you collect it through a system which makes it more reliable, you have evidence to back it, and you are using right standards, say GHG protocol, or DEFRA figures and those kinds of frameworks, GRI, and whatever the government has published to disclose the emissions, and to calculate and to use the right amount of you know uh, assumptions to build that up. And that is how you would know that credibility is built upon your reliable data, and not just fairly broad estimations and assumptions.
Thank you, Nazia. A question maybe for you, Jody. It says about a change to the definition of a large company. And just wondered if that affects the SECR compliance.
Yes, so short answer, no, not at the moment. So, for those that aren't aware, in 2025, the UK government shifted how it categorised the different size companies. So there was a slight change to large companies, but the SECR criteria remains the same. So it's been confirmed it will be the same ongoing until 2028, where there's nothing to say it will change then, but it could potentially change from then. So we'll stay monitoring that, and we'll act accordingly if it does. But there is, same as ESOS, it's like a 2-year opt in and opt out rule. So I assume, unless there's any changes, that this will remain the same. But if you suddenly drop out of the large company category, you can't just then drop out of SECR. It remains, you have to be out of that threshold for 2 consecutive years to drop out. So we'll monitor that. No changes at the moment, but maybe 2028 onwards.
Cheers, Jody. Um, Nazia, if I can ask, what is the risk of using offsets in a net zero strategy?
Um, Offsets can have a role, but they should not replace real estimations or reductions. The risk is that the organization really rely on offsets too early, because before they have reduced emissions as far as possible. The idea is to reduce first and then offset later. A credible approach should prioritize reductions first, like I said, define what residual emissions may remain, and only then consider high quality removals or offsets for those residual emissions. And it should be an end-to-end strategy, and not something that you have an X amount of total emissions and you decide to offset it. That is not how it works. All the SBTI and GHG protocols does not support that kind of ideologies. They need to understand how you are working out to make your operations more efficient in energy, or whether in terms of fuel usage or any other resource use, and then use offset, making sure that you're not really relying on those credits, carbon credits and offsets.
Thank you, Nazia. And I guess as well, not only is it, not really achieving anything, it's also very expensive too, right? I
Yeah,
mean, you
yeah.
can't just keep paying your way out if you want to. I mean, probably you're a
Yeah.
business that wants
And
to
then
make
you
money.
invest in your operations and make your
Yeah,
business more reliable. Yeah.
thank you. And there was a question about what was the acronym PWWR, which I think PPWR, which I think Leon, who's joining us today, might be able to answer for us if I unmute you,
Well,
Leon.
yeah, I think I've already answered that. We don't provide that service. So
Okay, you
yeah,
did that
but
directly, did
yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
super.
Sorry. Thank you.
No, cheers, Leon. Thank you. Scope 3 emissions. We don't directly control the suppliers, so how can we manage the emissions? What for you,
Um,
Nathia?
yeah, of course. I mean, scope 3 is really challenging because it sits outside of the company's direct control, but organization can still influence it. The first step is to identify the high impact categories and suppliers rather than trying to address everything at once. From there, organization can improve supplier data collection, engage priority suppliers, build expectation expectations into procurement processes, and work collaboratively on production opportunity. So it's more like a phase developing a phased plan rather than doing everything at once, and focusing on what is causing the most or more of the emissions share, and trying to engage with those suppliers, building that reputation, helping them understand why it is important, and that is how they would be sensitized on what needs to be delivered.
Excellent. Thank you. Someone's just messaged no questions for them, so thank you for letting us know. If anyone does have any more questions, I'll wait another 10 seconds before anyone posts them. But otherwise, I think we can probably wrap it up there and get ourselves a cold drink, because it's really, really warm. Super. Thank you very much for presentations today, Jodie and Nazia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We'll send emails around to everybody with links to view the recording, and if you have any other questions or you need anything in particular that you think of later on, then just get in touch. Lovely. Thanks, everybody.